אורן, אתה יכול להדליק את המיקרופון?
המיקרופון דלוק. שומע אותי?
שומע אותך. עכשיו אני אתן לך להיות ההוסט, ואז בעצם אתה יכול להדליק את המצלמה.
מצוין.
אוקיי, ההקלטה מתחילה עכשיו, ואחרי זה יעשו את העריכה, יסדרו את זה.
מצוין.
יש מצב שאתה מסדר על עצמך קצת אור? אתה נורא נורא חשוך.
עוד רגע. שנייה. דילמה. איפה יהיה עליי הכי הרבה אור? שנייה אחת. אני חושב שזה יהיה טיפה יותר טוב, רק נזיז את הדבר התקוע הזה מאחוריי. זה יותר טוב? שלום.
אתה עושה מצגת?
אני אעשה שיתוף מסך, אני רק שואל אם אתה רואה אותי יותר טוב עכשיו.
כן, יותר טוב.
מצוין.
יופי. אנחנו מתחילים ב8:20 שניות. ב9:20 שניות.
בסדר גמור. מי האנשים, מאיפה הם? סתם...
מכל העולם. מורים, אנשי חינוך, וגם סתם אנשים שמתעניינים.
אוקיי. טוב, כי אני יכול להגיד שחמותי איכשהו קיבלה את הקישור להרצאה הזאת.
אז כנראה היא חברה בקבוצה. מה היא עושה? היא אשת חינוך?
היא עושה, היא פנסיונרית. היא עובדה ביד ושם כמה וכמה שנים, אבל לא...
אוקיי, אז זה מסתובב. הקישור לקבוצה מסתובב אצל אנשי חינוך. יד ושם, זה חינוך.
הבנתי.
אבל זה מסתובב.
בסדר.
טוב, אז שיהיה בהצלחה, ואם חמותך מקשיבה, אז בכלל אתה חייב להיות מוצלח.
היא עדיין סובלת אותי, כן.
טוב, יאללה, אז בהצלחה. אני עוד רגע אחזור.
בסדר גמור. Okay. Can we start?
כן, אנחנו מתחילים.
אוקיי, אני לא רואה את התמונה שלי. אני נעלמה?
לא, כולם רואים אותך.
Okay, fine. So hello everyone. My name is Oren Sapir. I'm a tour guide and a historian. I deal a lot with the history and archaeology of Jerusalem. And in the time of these special days, or not very good days, but special days, we are getting towards the 9th of Av, the days of the destruction of the temples, and we will deal with the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians, as we can actually see them in the excavations of the city of Jerusalem. So as we dive in, we will have something that will help us out throughout this lecture, and this will actually be a map of the city. Not really a map, this is actually a picture of a model. The good thing about this model is that it shows us the walls of the city at the end of the First Temple period, and on it you will see, mostly in these red circles, what area we are actually talking about. So this is at the northern part of the city today, within the Jewish quarter of the old city of Jerusalem, and there in an excavation, something very interesting was found. Just before we go in, I will tell you that what I will actually show you in a sequence in this virtual tour will basically be in the way of how the excavation founded and when. So the first thing I'm showing you is actually the first thing discovered, and slowly we will actually roll through the sites as they were discovered. The year is just after the Six-Day War, in the end of the 1960s. Professor Nachman Avigail directs and manages a huge excavation throughout the Jewish quarter after it was destroyed during 1948, during the War of Independence, and left in many of its ruins scattered everywhere during the next almost 20 years. He deals with this excavation of the area, and he actually taught a lot about the archaeology of Jerusalem in the Hebrew University for many, many years. He actually explained that all the evidence we know, or all the evidence he knew, till the beginning of the 1950s and 60s, was centered not in the Jewish quarter. So he actually expected not to find anything really ancient from the First Temple period in his excavation, but he also got a few surprises as he was going through. In this excavation, he actually found what is nicknamed the Israelite Tower. In the Israelite Tower, what you can actually see is a massive tower. Notice the person with the yellow shirt and the blue jeans standing on top of this very massive structure, many, many feet height. It's actually a big fortification tower, and at its foot, they found ashes, and in between the ashes, as you can see on the right-hand side picture, they found 4 little pieces of metal scattered on the ground. 3 of them identical in their design. These are the 3. I'm using now the mouse. I hope you can see it. These are these 3 pieces. They're all made out of iron, and these are actually quite flat typed arrowheads. And these arrowheads, these arrowheads are the local style. The local style, which means the Israelite or Judaic type of arrowhead used by their army. Quite simple, a little bit heavy, made out of iron, and this is what they used. But notice there's one more, and this is slightly smaller. You can't see from the picture, but it's made out of bronze. It's actually a little bit more lightweight. It's in a different design, and it's considered the high tech of the ancient warfare. This was a Babylonian arrowhead. So here we can see the ashes, the arrows, part of them shot from the wall towards the besiegers, and one of them shot from the outside, hit the foot of the wall left behind from those days of destruction more than 2,500 years ago. That's the Israelite Tower. And nearby, they found a few portions of other fortifications and other pieces of the city from the same time, but we will skip far off to a different location. And I hope you can see the red circle on the right. And this is actually an area, very known area G in the city of David. And this is a picture from above. You can see the columns right in the center of the picture. Here they are right here. And these columns were actually found standing in the 1960s and later 70s and 80s excavation, removed so the excavation can continue and then put back in place. In the far end of this specific structure, a few interesting things were found. So let's take a better look at this structure. You can see the columns, and on the left, you can see the staircase that climbed up to the 2nd floor. not every house, not every building in antiquity had 2 floors, and this is something that already tells us of something important. This is a reconstruction of that house. What we just looked at, the stairs, are right here. And you can see the open courtyard, open to the sky, where you can actually come in with your animals and with the fresh food brought in. Cooking will be done there, and the bedroom is further in, and that's basically this area. But please notice this house has a back room, and that back room is very interesting. I beg your pardon, this ran too quickly. And in this back room, they found this square stone with holes through it. All you need to do is use your imagination for a moment, and you were looking at an ancient toilet seat. Not so many toilet seats were discovered from antiquity. At the moment, we know that we have many more found. Just a moment, someone's raising your hand. Is everything okay? Because I can't see the question. Okay, I'm sorry. And I know of a few more discovered in the city of David as well, in the excavations of the 1980s and a little bit more. Not so common is a toilet seat. Try to think of need of water, washing, need of some type of perfume or good sense to make the smell a little bit away from your bedroom that's nearby. But that's not the end of the story, telling us of the wealth and luxury of actually having such a thing in the home. Because just a few feet below the toilet seat, they found a deep pit. And actually that was where the sewage went. And there they found all sorts of remains that seemed quite interesting organically, and they were taken to be checked in a laboratory. So what actually they discovered was, looking at it, sorry again for this jumping, looking at it through the microscope, they found all sorts of weird, let's say, pieces that when they checked them carefully, they noticed these seem like they're parasites, telling us a little bit of food, or not so good food, maybe, that the people of Jerusalem ate in their homes, in their luxury homes, of the end of the First Temple period. Part of the biologists dealing with this said they might actually even teach us a little bit of their diet, because they claim that there's a specific parasite that you can only get if you eat uncooked meat. So who eats meat? When you have meat, you eat it. But uncooked is something that usually means there was no way of cooking it. But we're in a home. Kitchen's right here. Maybe they had some lack of wood to actually light the fire. And maybe this is some example telling us of the days of the siege, that there was no way of bringing wood for cooking from the outside. Other biologists said, we can't be so sure about these things. Don't take it too seriously. And they start fighting each other exactly if we can tell or not. Anyways, a toilet seat and its sewage underneath, and part of the food that was used to be eaten in those days, thousands of years ago. We go to the neighbor's house. The neighbor, just a little bit beyond, also has 2 floors. We're getting used to it in the luxury homes of the wealthy city of those days, thousands of years ago. This specific house had a problem. It was burnt. It was discovered covered in ashes, smashed, crumbling. But then when they were sifting through and removing the ashes that covered the floor, they found something very interesting, and that was pieces of wood that were charred and actually blackened from the fire. Part of these pieces were discovered after they were slightly cleaned up to actually be something that we can look at an interesting design. The lower left, please notice something that looks like fingers or something like that. A foot of a chair, apparently. You see another foot of the chair at the upper right. It seemed as if it had another piece connecting to it. Look at the nice carving and design. But an interesting one is the one on the upper left. You can see there's some type of leaves or branches or something coming out. These are very small pieces of wood. And when they were checked, they discovered that we are actually talking about pieces of wood that partly are local. Local trees might be pine trees, might be the local oak, but part of these pieces of wood that were discovered in this room actually take us far off to northern Syria, a tree called boxwood that doesn't even grow in Israel. So imported furniture in this room of this structure, we're already going back to seeing how luxurious these houses were, and how famous maybe and important should be the people that used these houses. In the neighboring structure, that only a few feet of it was really excavated and thoroughly enough, they found a smashed jug in it and around it. 51 tiny pieces of pottery. If you'll notice, these things are about half an inch and less in size. These are small parts of a piece of pottery that were stamped with a seal on top of them. So this is what we call a seal impression. And these seal impressions are usually closing a sack or a document. So it looks something like this. On one of them, the one that is reconstructing the document, we actually have a name that's very important. But before we get to that name, I want you to notice that the papyri or paper that they generally have, or maybe parchment that was used for the document, usually goes up in flames. The piece of clay actually hardens the pottery and survives through the fire, and therefore the signatures were discovered, but we have no idea what was written on the inside these documents that went up in flames. So the one right there on the left, the bottom left, is actually a name we know, and that was the first time ever in the excavation in Jerusalem that a name that we know from the biblical sources was ever discovered. So this is the area, this is the area, and what you see right here is the houses and the area above it. I'll check what I'm being asked. Okay. I was asked where are these seal impressions displayed. So the one you can see right now that was discovered over there, where we just mentioned in the bottom area, is actually in display in the Israel Museum. And this guy that now, I hope you can see the seal impression a little bit clearer, even though I'm not sure you can read it. These are the Hebrew letters used in the First Temple period, not the same ones as we use today, many times known as Hebrew script or sometimes ancient Hebrew script. It's actually quite easy to learn, it takes a few minutes, you catch the idea, and the name is Gemariyahu, the son of Shaphan. Gemariyahu, the son of Shaphan, is mentioned as a minister in the government of Judea, of the kingdom of Judah, at the end of the First Temple period. He's actually mentioned in Jeremiah chapter 36. He's mentioned there as a man that holds an office near the temple, and that he himself wasn't in his office in that story in that chapter. He himself wasn't at the office, he was actually in a meeting somewhere else. But we are told that his son was listening to the words of the prophet Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, read out loud for him by his helper Baruch, outside the gates of the Beit HaMikdash, the temple. And when he heard these terrible news, he starts running. Where does he run? It specifically says he went down, in Hebrew, vayered. He went down towards the king's palace and to the scribe's office. And there he found his father and announced the terrible news of the destruction coming up. So wait a minute. So the seal impression was discovered with many more in buildings that seem at first sight something that might be actually a residential area, but we might be actually wrong. These might be actually office structures that just look like homes in their architecture and design, just like today you can find many offices and actually residential structures. So this is the seal impression, the first one ever discovered that we know, Gemariyahu, the son of Shaphan, that he, his father, and his son are actually mentioned in the book of Jeremiah. But not only that, also his nephew is actually mentioned in the book, and that is a very famous man from the end of the First Temple period, Gedaliahu, the son of Achikam, the son of Shaphan. He was the governor of the land after the destruction, appointed by the Babylonians and murdered apparently shortly after by someone that didn't agree that he will receive such an important office. But wait a minute, it's just one. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Maybe it's just one person that had the exact same name, Gemariyahu, the son of Shaphan, just like this guy mentioned in chapter 36. But then, years later, 25 years after this was discovered in the 1980s, a new excavation at the top of the hill, and that's the design you can see in front of you with all these little rocks and structures and little blobs that actually, the blue ones that actually signify water cisterns. A few more seal impressions were discovered. This one, Yehuchal, the son of Shelemiah, was found right here. And please notice, just by looking at it, you can see there are 3 lines of writing in his seal impression. But before I get to that, I want to show you one more discovered in the same year. And this is Gedaliahu, the son of Pashul, discovered right here. And when this one was discovered in a pile of debris, he was found not alone. More than 100 seal impressions were discovered right there. So in the small space that's in the painting, stone by stone of the area we're talking about, more than 150 seal impressions were discovered. Quite a lot of signing, administration going on. But now I want to compare all 3 of these. The first one and the last one, you can see how organized, nicely oval shape. The letters are in a nice straight line, but the central one looks like a mess. It looks like someone that wasn't really professional actually made it. So the other 2, I just showed you, were actually discovered in 2005, and they tell us of, sorry, they were discovered in 2007, but we'll live with that date. They tell us they're both of them mentioned together in Jeremiah chapter 38 as ministers in the government that didn't like Jeremiah a bit and actually made sure he will be thrown in a pit trying to get rid of him. But who is this? Yehuchal, the son of Shalemiah, the one in the center. Who is he? Right here on his seal impression, we have his grandfather's name as well. What does that mean? I'll tell you, it's very, very rare. And that actually can teach us that this might be a newcomer into administration that wants to show you how important his family heritage is going back generations. But on the other hand, not a very professional scribe made his seal, and therefore his seal impression looks quite lousy compared to the others. So 3 seal impressions with 3 names we know, discovered in a very, very small space, close to the top of the city of David. We move aside and a little bit up towards the Temple Mount, a gate complex that was discovered during several excavations, several times. This actually ended only about 10 years ago. Aerial photograph, you can't understand a thing, so let's help you out a little bit. This blue rectangular shaped space, what's caught inside it, is identified as a gate. A gate in biblical times is built in a very interesting way. Usually it is built with rooms on either side of a passageway. So 2 rooms now in these yellow squares were discovered. The other 2 that are supposed to be on the other side, please notice it's in a dotted line, and that is mainly because only the infrastructure underneath it was discovered and all the rest was demolished, smashed and moved aside by later construction from the Second Temple period, Byzantine eras, and even more. In between these 2 sets of rooms, there is a passageway. And that's where people can walk. And they come from the outside into the corridors or city or area that this gate leads into. So that's the gate. We'll take a look at it later on. Nearby the gate, they found an administrative structure. The connection between it and the gate was smashed by the later period construction, but this structure will be of a lot of interest for us. And from it and on, 2 things were discovered. One is a square tower. That's actually the tower in the city walls that's protecting this gate complex and administrative structure, and a piece of some 40 yards long of the city walls. These city walls are actually dated to what we call the 10th century BCE, or in other ways, somewhere around the days of the king Shlomo, Solomon, David's son. So this is the gatehouse. To the left, you can see the ruins of the rooms that are on the side. And this is something like guard or taxation rooms, where someone inspects who is passing in the center that actually allows him into this area of the city. To the next structure, this is what you can usually see of this building, but let's close up a little bit. And please notice these 3 big jugs. These are reconstructions, of course, not the originals, but they are settled down exactly where there were jugs in the excavation, of course, smashed pieces. The central jug was found with an inscription written right on top of it. And I hope you can read these letters. These are, again, the ancient letters. Right here, you can see a lamed that actually says it is belonging to, or maybe for the, shin and resh, together forming the word sar, minister. This is a hey, aleph, and the head of a vav. The minister of O, it could be otsar, which means finance and treasury. It could be urvot, theoretically, which is stables. It could be ofim, the bakers. If it's the baker, I hope Pharaoh isn't celebrating his birthday nearby. because the baker in that story in the book of Bereshit in Genesis didn't end well. But anyways, this means that whatever the contents of this jug, if it was flour, oil, or I do not know what, actually was preserved for a specific office. And that makes me think, not only me, of course, many agree with this, that the different jugs discovered in this room, 12 if we want to count them, were each accessible from the entrance. They're not piled up at the far end of the structure. They're all accessible. And in another one, they found an engraving of a palm tree, maybe telling us what's inside it or who it was for, not in letters, but actually in a painting, meaning not everyone knew how to read and write. But anyhow, this administrative structure was next to the gate. So we can assume that taxation that could be in produce, could be in food, could be in wine and oil, was actually brought from the gate directly into this room to the specific jug, into the specific office that needs to accept and wants this taxation. But apparently this building had a second floor. And from its second floor, people tend to do all sorts of things, like throw things down. So there's a lot of debris and everything collapsed into it. Here you see a picture from the end of the 1980s where Dr. Eilat Mazar, which she was a little bit younger than she is today, is actually showing you one of the spots where these big jugs sat. You can even see the little hole in the floor where it sat in the many pieces of broken jugs that were collected. And in another picture, please notice the amount of these big pieces of these jugs smashed from the crashing of what was above onto all of this, but also preserving it right there. Just a little bit aside at the edge of the room, here it is, ashes on the floor. The place was also burnt, and not only did it collapse and smash, it also went up in flames. So back to the second floor, and we take over a look from the top, from the up on top. Outside, this is, again, a picture from the 1980s, where you can see the portion of the guard tower that was outside. Look at this massive construction, big stones. A newer picture from 2009, of course, shows you a lot more as the excavation continued. And you can see the size of these big stones that actually held, supported the guard tower and protected the administrative structure. But in this space where Dr. Mazar is standing right now in this picture, what happened was that everyone threw garbage outside the window, down outside the walls. And there they found more than 30 seal impressions and all sorts of small objects that tell us of the use of that structure above. One of those seal impressions was discovered, and here you can see it very well, at the edge of this fortification, just at the corner of the structure. And this is the seal impression of a very important person. And the name goes like this. Le belongs to, or it's in the hands of, Chizkiyahu, Hezekiah. Here you see an aleph, and the continuation of that line is right here with the Zayin. And then Mem Lamed Chaf, Yud Hey and something. In the beginning, when they read this, they read Hezekiah something. They couldn't understand. Malkiyahu. Hezekiah, apparently the son of Malkiyahu. These are normal names. Malkiyahu, if I'll just translate the name, means God is the king. Sounds good, not bad. But many of these seal impressions, after they were discovered, quickly read, put in a drawer, and okay, they'll wait for the final publication. More than 30 discovered, so they didn't pay too much attention to this specific one. But 3.5 years later, an archaeologist received that drawer and was told to actually write out the final publication of the specific find. And then she noticed something no one else noticed before. I'm pointing at it right now. It's very hard to notice. It's a tiny little dot. Please notice there's a dot here, and I'll show you another dot that's easier to see right before these three letters. These dots in biblical times actually are the space bar. This is how someone tells that we pass to the next word, which actually means if this is an end of a word and this is an end of a word, the name here isn't Malkiyahu. This word is actually Melech. Melech means king. And therefore, the next word is actually Yehudah, Judah. And just the side of the seal impression is just smashed, so we don't have the last letters. So we can read it again. Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, Achaz in Hebrew, the king of Yehudah, Judah. And that's interesting, to find the seal impression of the king himself in the excavation. you're looking at this for already a minute or two, and you might be asking yourself, wait a minute, what are those funny drawings in the middle of this seal impression? So here you see a sun disk. You can see the sun rays shining on the words here, and you can see the sun disk is actually winged. This is a very known ancient type of decoration or design that actually has its symbolism in Egypt, for example, as meaning something like God protects me. This thing on the right that resembles a cross with a funny loop on the top is actually an ankh. This is an Egyptian symbol that means life. So I'm protected and I receive life, says Hezekiah. Everyone said, okay, what are we doing here? What's going on? But if we open 2 Kings 20, we might actually find out that we know that this king Hezekiah was told by the prophet Isaiah, Yeshayahu, you are going to die. And then the prophet turns around and starts leaving. As the prophet is leaving down the corridor, the king turns around and starts praying, asking for life. Prophet, just outside, receives a prophecy, get back in, tell the king, you will live. And the way of actually showing that you will receive new life will actually be by a movement of the sun and therefore of the shade on a specific type of staircase that was outside the palace or something like that. So we can actually try to understand that this means that the king received the symbol of life thanks to the sun, and he used these Egyptian symbols just to tell us that in his personal seal. If correct, this is actually an interesting example of a king that changes his signature during his days. After this was announced and everyone starts getting amazed by the king of the city, his name was found in the debris and ruins, a few feet away another seal impression was discovered, and that's this one. Okay, I'll make it easy, here you go. And what you see right here are the following. You see the tail and 3 of the legs of an animal, which is something actually quite common on seals and seal impressions. And then le, belonging to, Yesha'ayah, and then 3 letters, nun, bet, and yud in the bottom line that actually are the beginning of the word navi, prophet. But then someone said, wait a minute, this is broken. We're missing a few pieces. So is there enough room for these additional letters needed? Is this Yesha'ayahu Hanavi, Isaiah the prophet? So most researchers said definitely could be, but there's a little tiny little problem. And that is usually in biblical times, they did not write letters that represented vowels. You only write letters that can be heard. And the 3rd letter on the bottom line, the yud, actually here represents a E, not something you can actually pronounce and hear the letter itself. It's not a consonant, it's a vowel, and that's not something they wrote, which means here they pronounce the yud. And apparently the real person here wasn't Yeshayahu the Navi, the prophet. He was apparently Yeshayahu the Novi, the man from Nov. And then it actually drops off the option that this was the prophet himself, very, very known from the days of the king Hezekiah, Chizkiyahu. But let's leave, let's say 10% of a chance that for some reason they put the yud, and this really might be the prophet himself. We skip not too far away, a little bit southwest to the Giv'ati Parking Lot excavations. I have to admit that I really like the Giv'ati Parking Lot excavations, except because they taught me 2 very important things. As a student, I participated in the excavation there, and there I found out that excavation takes a long, long time. And the second thing I found out is that it's much, much nicer to talk about it. So here you see a picture from the east looking down westward into this massive excavation, loads of different layers, one on top of each other. I'm going to focus on our period, the end of the First Temple period. So we close up to the center. And in the central structure that goes really deep down in the excavation, a few interesting things were discovered. Here you see a picture from the side. Please notice these massive stone columns, nicely built. One of them on the right is actually one piece monolithic. The other one, very nicely interlocking stones. Very impressive construction, especially understanding that this structure excavated right here might even be the cellar of the structure, not the floors that were easily accessible. This might be actually level minus 1. Another look at this, you can see another monolithic big column right here, and we actually gonna go right in between these two to go a little bit in, and this is what they discovered inside. All these little tags actually tell you that from these spots, the archaeologists took out, in a very specific, delicate way, pieces of wood that were burnt. You can see all the little dots of the burnt wood, easily visible but charred and blackened out. And these were taken out to be checked in different ways to try to date it accurately and get a better understanding of things. But that's just one thing. The opposite corner of this house, you can see many more labels, but look at the layer of ashes here. And then the debris and rocks that fell on it from above. That's from the floor, or maybe floors that were 1 and 2 above the -1 that we're right now looking at. So this was burnt fire catching everywhere, and then everything collapsed on top of it. Another look at the debris and mess. And here you see something very interesting. What's right here in the center is a piece of a floor, the floor of the story that was right above, that collapsed. And this is actually plaster. The floor was plastered. What they discovered is that the floor was going up, falling down when it was actually caught in flames, and it kept on burning. And as it kept on burning, the particles inside, the molecules inside, were heated up and started moving and then rearranged as it was cooling off. And they discovered that in those funny little drills you can see on the left. They actually discovered that this was on fire, and therefore were able to understand the heat and time of the destruction of the structure, getting back to the end of the First Temple period. Just a moment. And we continue. In the rooms down below, suddenly in the debris, as they're sifting through, they find a small piece of nice-looking stone. And on it, engraved, is a name. This is a seal, not a seal impression as I showed you before, which means this is written backwards. So when you'll press it on the piece of clay, you'll be able to read the seal impression. And this is a man named Ikar. Ikar in Hebrew today might actually mean farmer, but it could easily be just a normal name, the son of Matanyahu. Matanyahu, or anyone saying that thank you for something that was given. Matan is a giving, Nitina is to give. That's a very common name also today in the world and in Israel as well. So this is a seal discovered in this building, and this is a seal impression discovered in the building. Please notice the clay was actually a very dark color and even became a little bit burnt in addition. And here you can see a very interesting name so clearly written. Lamed Le belongs to Natan Melech. This is in one word. Natan, giving or gave. The king gave, or the king gives. Eved, servant. This Eved isn't slave as you usually translate the word. It usually means servant. And when you say servant of Hamelech, servant of the king, it usually means he's a high-ranked official, not the one that serves him tea. So this Natan Melech, the servant of the king, Eved HaMelech, is apparently the same man that we can actually find in 2 Kings 23, in the days of Yoshiyahu, Josiah, just a few years before the destruction by the Babylonians, when we are told that during this king that was cleaning up all the idolatries from everywhere in the city, we are told of the office of Natan Melech. And apparently it's the same exact guy. Where it is, this office, and what happened in it is actually mentioned. 2 Kings 23. We keep on going, and now a little bit down to the newest excavation, I think, that I can actually take you to. It's as Giv'ati Parking Lot is as well, but this is really active as we are talking right now. Of course, not at 9:30 p.m. Israel time, but during the day. And there they found a room that in it amounts of fire and charred wood and everything everywhere. And on it, please notice also, all these broken pieces of pottery that are just smashed onto the floor of this room. So the place was really burnt and crushed and smashed. By the way, the neighboring room to the right and the neighboring room to the left, no destruction, no fire. Very interesting. Another room to the left, destruction again, fire, and a mess. Very interesting, and the archaeologists actually say the Babylonians maybe destroyed buildings and set them afire, but they didn't set down each and every room in each and every house. But they did destroy this place thoroughly. And as they're going through, they find the amount of pottery, and they start taking it out. They take this piece of pottery out, flip it over, clean it up, and this is what they see. They see a seal impression, not with a word or a name on it, a flower engraved in, actually sealed on. This was a very, very common decoration, this type of flower on handles of jugs. And this is part of the administration system of the kingdom of Judah and the city of Yerushalayim, Jerusalem, end of the First Temple period. These jugs were usually same size in some, let's say, governmental or kingdom administration decides the size, and the researchers assume this has to do with the normal taxation from the country farms into the big cities, and this is a very, very common find that we know from the last just few decades of the First Temple period. In between the ruins, smashed right there means it was something that was there in use in the days of the destruction. Just in that room, they continue. You can see the little piece of charred wood on the left. Please notice the piece of metal on the right. It's the same type of arrowhead I showed you in the beginning. This is a Babylonian arrowhead. It's bronze, lightweight, triangular shaped, and considered very, very well organized. So good that the Babylonians actually recollected them at the end of their wars, which means they destroy, conquer. We won, now what? Set your soldiers to search through the battlefield. Collect all the arrowheads that weren't damaged. Throw off the piece of wood and reuse it. An arrowhead like that, and here you see a much, much better picture after cleaning up, was discovered also in the debris thrown out a little bit more than 20 years ago from the Temple Mount by the Islamic Waqf. You can see its size also with the scale. So what did the Babylonians do now? So they picked up these arrowheads. They make sure they didn't get crooked and smashed, because then they're useless. If they're still in good shape, they'll actually attach a new stick to it. And sometimes, just for the fun of it, let's add a little bit of a feather or two. And now they can reuse these arrows for the next battle. To say the truth, many people see archers as snipers. They're looking for the enemy and then shooting him right now. But in reality, in the ancient times, archers were artillery. They actually come in hundreds or even in thousands. And together they all set their bows with the mark and with the order, they all shoot together. And therefore hundreds, even thousands of arrows are being shot together towards the city walls that are being sieged. What did the defenders of the city do? They just duck. It's a rain of arrows that keeps on being shot again and again and again. At the end of the war, if it's possible, and if they win, they will recollect them. So if a few are left behind here and there, it actually means that the structure collapsed and buried this inside, or the Babylonians didn't find it when they were searching, but this way or that. A few of their arrowheads were left behind. Till today, they counted just a few dozen Babylonian arrowheads discovered in the city of Yerushalayim throughout its excavations in different locations. I'm going to another place, a little bit further down from where we just visited. And that's a fortification wall that you can see in the bottom picture discovered right here. Please notice, below the fortification of the city, that you can see just a little bit to the left of the arrow pointing down, a new fortification was discovered, which means they added some fortification, another little bit of protection for a specific small part of the city. So the spot between this and that will actually be easily identified as what we can call a place that is in between two walls, or in Hebrew, Bein HaChomotayim. Why am I saying this? Because this takes me to the second book of Kings 25. Kafei, there we are told of the last king of Judah, the king Tzidkiyahu, that in his days, the city was destroyed by the Babylonians. And when we go and actually read through, we find out the time the siege started. And that's the 10th of Tevet, about 6 months ago, or a little bit more in the calendar. But what happens next, after a while, at the 9th of Tammuz, about a month ago almost, the Babylonians are breaking into the city. And then what happened? There was a problem. Hunger already in the city after a long, long siege. And the city is being cracked open from one end, and from the gate that is in between the two walls, in Hebrew, Derech Shar Ben HaChomotayim, the king Zedekiah runs away. And when he runs away, what will happen is that he'll be starting to run, and as the verse tells us, he ran towards Jericho, Jericho. So if we try to get the idea, he's running away. And what do the Babylonians do? They hit him. They find him down in the valley, capture him, punish him, and actually make sure he will be punished for being a king that fights against the Babylonians, especially because they appointed him as king 11 years beforehand. So Tzidkiyahu is taken away, and so is his family and sons and everywhere. The city is destroyed and burnt. But when? When was it destroyed and burnt? I'm still in the same chapter, in the chapter of 25, 2nd Kings. And there we are told, that's very interesting. After we said that in the 9th of Tammuz, the Babylonians broke in, we actually find out that in the 7th day of the 5th month, which is 7th day of Av, which is actually today, the Babylonians destroy the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, and the city, and they set the big homes on fire, and they smash the city walls. But we know this as the 9th of Av. To make life a little bit more complicated, I skipped to the last chapter of the book of Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah I mentioned before, 52. And there we have the same description, almost word by word, except a tiny difference. Not in the 7th day of the month of Av, but in the 10th, which is actually this coming Friday. So what is going on? In what day was the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, destroyed? The answer should actually be all together. And that takes me to a very famous Mishnah in Tractate Taanit that describes the days of the destruction and the days of fasting and mourning that we are in them right now. 5 things happened in the 17th of Tammuz, and 5 things happened in the 9th of Av. And then they have a list, 5 events, what happened, different problems and terrible things that happened from the days of the wilderness, from the days of the first, and from the days of the second temple period. But what were we told? That in the 17th day of Tammuz, the city was breached. The enemy broke in. Is this the first temple period or the second? There's a big debate trying to understand it. But in the 9th of Av, we are told that the first and second temples were destroyed. But actually, we just see that the story is a little bit more complicated. Started in the 7th, ends in the 10th, apparently. And because of that, in some of the customs, the days of mourning and not shaving and not eating meat or other things are pushed all the way to the 10th, to the next day, to actually keep going on with it a little bit more into the days and time of the destruction. Interesting thing is that many centuries later, at the end of the second temple period, Flavius Josephus, Yosef ben Matityahu, the Jewish historian, describes the days of the destruction, tells us what's going on as the Romans are breaking into the city, walls and destruction and burning. And then he says that in the 9th of Av, the temple was burnt by the Romans, just like centuries before by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. So in his tradition, in his knowledge, the 9th of Av is the date, and it goes together all the way. And also in his description, we understand, and through the Talmud, that it continued into the 10th. So the fast is in the middle, when everything's going up in flames, is still burning, is still taking place, and therefore in many traditions, from the 7th of Av, which is, as I said today, it becomes the traditions of mourning and remembering the destruction become a little bit more intensified. And therefore, in these days, we mourn and think and remember those days thousands of years ago that left in different places, not in every house and not in every corner, but in different places of the city, next to its walls, in its administration structure, in the homes, in the fancy buildings, ashes, destruction, burning wood that leaves behind sometimes little pieces of information, including names we might know, people we might actually be able to identify, and the administration of the city that is destroyed and taken by the Babylonians to the exile. The prophet Jeremiah tells the people leaving, don't forget your city. One day it will be built again on top of its ruins. I want to thank all of you for listening to this short lecture, taking us back to more than 2,500 years ago, to the days of the destruction of the city of Jerusalem, what happened to it and what we can actually learn from collecting the little details in different excavations from 50 years apart that actually tell us what is going on. Where do the Babylonians break in from? Where do they leave their arrowheads behind? And where can we see the ashes of their torches and arrows? Thank you very much. I do not know if it's possible, but what I will do right now is I will start offering the option of questions. If there are questions, please you can ask. What I will do is I'll stop the share and then I can see myself at last. Anything at all, you can use the chat, of course. Thank you very much. Really feel free. I mean, I still have a few minutes. I'm in no hurry. So I will thank all of you as well. Oh, wait a minute. I do not. I know it was recorded, so it should be possible to receive the recording from the administration that actually runs these lectures. I'm sure you can get the recording from them. We'll just answer. There was a scientific process mentioned. Yes, there was, about remains that might actually be connected to the days of the what they ate and what, let's say, diseases, intestine diseases they might have received from eating raw meat. There are biologists that say this is possible to identify. Others say you cannot, but there is an option like that. Someone asked if they can volunteer. There are places where it is possible. At the moment, it's a little bit complicated with the current situation, but it is theoretically possible to volunteer, even though I have to admit most of the workers are paid workers that come 5 days a week, 8 hours a day for it's intense work, and volunteers usually take time to get the hang of it and work in, but it definitely is possible to join the current excavations. There are 2 of the sites that I mentioned that are still being excavated. Thank you very much, everyone. And I hope these days become much happier days to all of us. Thank you very, very much. Just to answer one question I received, and that is the seal is a seal, and the bulla in Latin is a seal impression, which means it is the smashing it or pressing it onto a piece of clay. That's what we call a bulla in Latin, or seal impression in English. Thank you very, very much. Enjoy, everyone, your days.